Welcome, everybody, to the ADHD Parent Support Group. We are being joined today by Mary E. Smith. She is an ADHD life coach with more than 15 years of experience helping families reduce conflict, strengthen executive function skills, and support children in developing independence. She specializes in translating modern ADHD motivation and executive function research into practical, parent-implemented strategies that work in real homes. Mary is the creator of Chaos-Free Family Parenting Training Program and Chaos-Free Homework. She regularly speaks to parents, educators, clinicians, and professional audiences on sustainable behavioral changes without reliance on rewards and punishments. Thank you for joining us, Mary. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me, Shane. I just appreciate the opportunity to spread the message and to help you out.
Definitely. So, why don't you go ahead and get started?
All righty. All right. So I am an ADHD coach and I work with families of children who are 16 and under. I do that in a collaborative environment. My vision is that every child impacted by neurodivergence finds their most steadfast ally and their most compassionate teacher of life skills at home. This QR code will provide a link to a video of this presentation if you would like a copy of the slides or you want a transcript of the presentation. If you learn best that way, you can get it through that QR code. I just want to invite you here today. This is a lot of information, so it's going to be like drinking from a fire hose, but just to sit back, relax, and just listen to what I have to say. And if you don't have this QR code yet, don't worry, I'm going to show it again at the end of the presentation as well. Just to disclose, the two strategies that you're going to learn about at the end of my presentation come from my parent training course, Chaos Free Family. Now, today I want to talk to you about changing your child's behavior without using rewards and punishment. I'm going to show you how you can motivate change in ways that will strengthen the relationship between you and your child and improve the relationship they have with themselves. Now, 4 years ago, I was in a head-on car accident and it messed me up. Not physically, thanks to seat belts and airbags, but mentally, something just shifted. I had trouble focusing on conversations. I alternated between anger, crying, just feeling numb. I felt like I was wearing this lead suit all the time, and I started having panic attacks. I couldn't sit in a restaurant or go to a performance, to shop for groceries, even ride in a car without feeling like I was going to pass out. I even went to the ER twice thinking, I'm dying. My body is literally shutting down, and no one can see this. My doctors and my husband just kept talking about my scans and my physical examinations instead of looking at this person dying right in front of them. And I figured out that if no one can see me dying, no one's going to help me. Finally, an ER doctor explained to me that my body was not shutting down. I wasn't dying, but that my body had suffered this incredible flood of hormones. And that was impacting my brain's ability to distinguish a legitimate threat from just an everyday stress. And he told me, you need help that I can't give you. So I consulted my psychiatrist and I started EMDR therapy. Now, in the early days, I kept asking my therapist, hey, what happened to my brain? Why am I acting like this? Please give me some hack to stop these panic attacks. I didn't feel safe anywhere, and I certainly didn't feel like I was useful to anyone. I wanted to be able to perform in my everyday life again. That's all I wanted. And one day, my therapist said, Mary, I sense how important this why is to you. But I wonder if that question might be getting in the way of your healing right now. Would it be okay if, just for now, we put it aside until we have more information? And I reluctantly and suspiciously agreed. She asked me to visualize this why as an object, give it a form, give it a texture, a color. And for me, this was a spiky black ball. And she asked me, hey, can you visualize somewhere in this room to put it until we're ready to address it? Well, my impertinent, smartass self decided to put it underneath her chair because even though it wasn't a real object in my mind, I felt like there is no way you're going to forget to come back to this because you're going to be sitting on top of it, right? So let me know if you relate to any of these statements. You're wondering why rewards and punishment are not working to change your child's behavior. You're worried that if this simple, universal technique of using rewards and punishment can't change your child's behavior, what's going to happen to them in the long term? Will they ever be able to motivate themselves? You're starting to lose confidence as a parent. That countdown to college is ticking, and you can't figure out how to motivate them toward their own independence. And finally, the stress and the dysfunction in your home is reaching a level where you're starting to worry that you're damaging the relationship between you and your child. I want to give you some hope here today because there's a lot of science to back up your lived experience. A lot of evidence that explains why rewards and punishment don't work to make long-term changes in human behavior, especially those humans with ADHD. So I want to invite you all to take all of that frustration, anger, fear, any other emotion you're having, give it a form, give it a texture, give it a color. Let's just put it somewhere else for the next 45 minutes and get some separation from it. Now, I'm not going to go over the entire history of ADHD, but it's important to know that when ADHD was added to the Diagnostic and Statistics Manual in 1968, it was categorized as a disruptive behavioral disorder. And it was grouped with things like conduct disorder and oppositional defiance. The focus of these behaviors is on the individual's behavior outward toward others. In the 70s, at about this same time, there was a lot of research that showed how negative parenting behaviors like harsh punishment, yelling, nagging could also contribute to a child's disruptive behavior. And so these behavioral parent training programs were developed to teach parents how to use a more positive parenting method as a means of reducing those unwanted behaviors in their child. The key principles of this parent training in the 70s was to empower parents to be part of their child's support team by working with the teachers and their care professionals. It was to help parents set realistic expectations and to communicate those clearly to the child. This training taught the importance of promoting a conversation with the child and listening to their concerns instead of just communicating with them through a set of instructions and expectations. It taught parents how to address a conflict constructively so that they could find solutions that satisfied both the parent's expectations and the child's needs. These programs asked parents to shift from thinking about pathology to thinking about behavior. Basically, let's not get tied up in why the child is behaving that way, but let's focus on the environmental factors that are contributing to that behavior. The core element and foundation of these programs was the use of positive reinforcement for behavior modification. In other words, these programs taught parents to reward good behavior and ignore or mildly punish bad behavior. This is also known as instrumental learning or operant conditioning. And folks, this is how we train animals. And it's also the method that most parents and teachers are still using today because it's the only method they know. Now, between the 80s and the 2010s, there was a lot of research interest, pardon the pun, in ADHD. And what we learned just revolutionized the way we understood it. Studies showed that ADHD has a genetic link, meaning it's passed down from parents to children. And this supports the idea that ADHD could have a biological cause. Researchers found that kids who showed ADHD symptoms before age 12 continued to have those symptoms into adulthood. And so this early start and this lifelong pattern supported this idea that there might be a developmental component as well. We all know people with ADHD often have challenges with things like staying focused, remembering information, controlling impulses, regulating their emotions. And so this showed there's also this inward impact of these symptoms on a person's behavior. Using tools like a functional MRI, scientists found that there are differences in the areas of the brain related to focus, impulse control, and emotional regulation. And we saw that these areas may develop more slowly in people with ADHD. Now, another thing we learned is that asking parents to ignore pathology was a big mistake because removing that context of a person's behavior leaves too much room for incorrect and pessimistic assumptions. Now we know that the more a parent understands ADHD, the better perspective they have on their child's challenging behavior. That better perspective results in a gentler, more constructive response. Now, while ADHD can cause some disruptive behavior, it's generally accepted that these behaviors are the result of the underlying brain differences or an impairment caused by those brain differences. So, when you ask, hey, is this ADHD or is this just being a kid? If you have a child with ADHD, the two are really inseparable. Our brains and the way they are what guide our behavior. All this evidence shows that ADHD comes from differences in the brain, not from poor choices or from bad parenting. And so in 2013, ADHD was recategorized as a neurodevelopmental disorder in the DSM. Now, while our understanding changed significantly, unfortunately, our behavioral interventions did not. Now, if we're going to talk about changing behavior or learning a new skill, we have to consider the impact of ADHD on the motivation process in the brain. As I said, we have to understand some of the pathology. Now, the next few slides, just hang with me. I'm not trying to make you a neuroscience, but just listen to what is going on in the brain. When a neurotypical brain engages in an activity associated with a positive outcome or a reward, neurons in the ventral tegmental area produce and release dopamine to that nucleus accumbens. The nucleus accumbens shares connections to the amygdala, and this helps translate this dopamine signal into a feeling of pleasure and emotional meaning to that outcome. It also shares communications with the hippocampus, and it allows that dopamine to help encode a memory and a learning to that rewarding experience. And finally, the dopamine in the activity of the prefrontal cortex helps link this feeling of reward to that learning of that behavior, and it creates this conscious awareness of the experience. And together, it's this system that motivates a person to repeat a behavior that led to that positive outcome. In the ADHD brain, however, dopamine levels are typically lower, and the slower brain development contributes to a smaller cortical volume. This means that the ADHD brain doesn't have enough dopamine to efficiently carry those motivational signals to those key areas of the brain, and it has fewer or less developed pathways that could carry those messages. Now, this lower level of dopamine and reduced signaling disrupts that reward pathway. The effect is a difference in how a person with ADHD perceives and experiences reward and pleasure. And in everyday life, that looks like less enthusiasm for starting and completing tasks. One more technical slide. Let's look at this in action. In instrumental learning, that rewards and punishment learning, the thinking is that if I constantly reward a person for a behavior, it gets easier for that person to perform that behavior. Now, let's say a neurotypical person, child or adult, it does not matter, does a task that they were signaled or cued to do. Not because they were promised a reward or they were threatened with punishment, they received a signal. It could have been something they remembered, could have been a post-it note, an alarm on their phone. They got the signal and they did the task. Now, if we give them an unexpected reward, their brain is going to fire off this shot of dopamine. Now I want to communicate to this person that you're expected to do this task every day for the foreseeable future. I'm also going to promise you a reward each time you do it. And if I deliver that reward timely and consistently, something's going to happen to that little shot of dopamine. In the early stages of learning, while we're practicing to make this task a habit, we're going to see that shot of dopamine split. Some of the dopamine is going to be released right after I give the signal to perform, or they receive that signal. And some of it's going to come after they actually get the reward. We call this first shot anticipatory dopamine. Now, in the later part of the learning cycle, after many repetitions, after many deliveries of reward, this shifting continues until that dopamine release occurs right after the signal to perform. Hardly any comes when the reward is actually delivered. Now, this anticipatory dopamine is very important because it's evoking this experience of reward before they've ever done the task. And it's working to motivate the person to repeat that behavior. They're getting these signals of motivation that make it so much easier to initiate and follow through on that task at hand. ADHD brains react similarly to unexpected rewards. And in the early part of the learning cycle, we even see that there's a minimal shift of anticipatory dopamine. Unfortunately, that's all we get. So in operant conditioning, rewards and punishment, the person with ADHD does not get the benefit from that motivational boost of anticipatory dopamine. Okay, since I showed you why rewards are not working, I also need to show you how the continued use of punishment is actually damaging to the motivational process. Chronic punishment, physical or verbal, is known to further suppress the reward pathway. It's linked to reduced gray matter in the prefrontal cortex. Smaller cortical mass means fewer connections, right? It's related to lower stress tolerance, making it hard to tell the difference between a real threat and a benign stress. Even low frequency punishment is associated with poorer executive functioning, making it harder for the person to regulate their behavior and their emotions. And rather than improving the behavior, a frequent punishment is linked to higher levels of aggression and more difficulties with emotional regulation. Children who are exposed to frequent punishment face an increased risk of anxiety, depression, and self-esteem that can persist into adulthood. And finally, punishment often escalates other negative behaviors in the home instead of teaching coping and regulation skills. And this works to trap families in this cycle of stress and conflict. The big takeaway from these past few slides is that rewards don't work as well as you thought they did, and all forms of punishment just make it worse. All right, so I just want to check in with you here. Are you having some big feelings? Maybe you're thinking, oh no, I have screwed up my kids. I've screwed up my students. I've screwed up my clients. If you're having these feelings, I want you to know nothing is so far gone that you can't make a meaningful change to make things better. So if you're having these big yuck feelings, give them a form, give them a color, give them a texture, put them with those ones from before. Let's just get recentered. And as we do that, I want you to repeat after me. I know you guys are on mute. Repeat to yourself. I've done my best with what I experienced, what I was taught, and with what I knew. All right, let's get to the good news now. Let me introduce you to self-determination theory. This theory recognizes that humans, not just ADHD humans, have internal motives made up of our psychological needs, our cognitions, that's the way we learn and process the world around us, and our emotions. Now, these internal motives kind of act as a mediator between that signal and our resultant behavior. The satisfaction of these internal motives is what gives our behavior direction, energy, and persistence, motivation. So, in other words, it's not about what I get in return or what I avoid that motivates me to do a task. I am motivated by having my personal innate human needs met. Now, a subtheory of self-determination theory called basic needs theory argues that a sense of well-being and motivation is fueled by the satisfaction of three universal human needs: relatedness, autonomy, competence. And when these needs are met in our environment and in the processes that we're using, our motivation increases. Let's look at the first one. Relatedness is that need to care for others and feel cared for in return. Now, children with ADHD need people that understand the true nature of their challenges and that show interest in working with them to find solutions. Without relatedness, this struggle to perform turns into an internal story of I'm alone. No one understands me, and I have no one here to help me figure this out. And when parents come to me for help, they generally come with this list of behaviors they want me to fix or to help them to fix. And I often sense this disconnect between these behaviors and the parent's acknowledgement of these brain differences that are contributing to the behaviors. In fact, I will hear, I don't want them to use ADHD as an excuse. Parents, ADHD is not an excuse. It's the reason, it's the context. If your child tells you, I can't because of my ADHD, they need you to believe them. This is how they tell you they're struggling and they need help. Now, often when I talk to the child, I'll hear, my parents don't care about me. They just want to know if my homework's done and if my room is clean. And that's because that's the majority of the conversations they're having with their parents. You can hear it in their voice. They just feel out of sync with the world around them. I'll have parents tell me, but Mary, all they want to talk about is Minecraft and TikTok videos and K-pop Demon Hunters and 6'7", right? Folks, these are the things that interest your child. And sharing their interest with you is how they're attempting to relate to you. Parents need to explore these possible ways that they're not meeting that need for relatedness. They should be learning about the neurodevelopmental nature of ADHD. They need to learn how to view a child's performance through the lens of executive functioning. And they need to include the child in the problem-solving process so they can stop seeing themselves as the problem and start seeing themselves as part of the solution. Let's take a look at the second need. That's autonomy. This is the need to experience learning and performance as freely chosen and volitional, that we have some sort of control in our lives. Now, some parents will react really strongly to this word because they feel like I'm about to give all of the authority to the child and just let them go feral. That's not what's happening. For now, I want you to think of autonomy as just being the opposite of micromanagement. Now, some of the ways that the need for autonomy goes unmet is through these strict rules that have been developed in response to the child's challenges, right? You can have a hard time getting off of your iPad to come do your homework, so we're just not going to have iPad during the week, right? They use directive language that sounds like harsh commands. Pick up your socks, make your bed, go do your laundry, start your homework. And extremely frustrated parents sometimes just check out because what they tried didn't work. They don't know what else to do. So they just leave it to their child to try to figure it out. Instead, I suggest giving clear and defined expectations to your child. Let them decide or help them decide the process they're going to use to meet that expectation. An example might look like your room needs to be cleaned before you start playing games today. That means bed made, floor vacuum, laundry done. Then ask the child. That point right there is where most parents just leave the room. They've done their job. Stay. Ask the child. How do you plan to meet that expectation? They may want to start with laundry, then vacuum, then make the bed last. They will have met your expectations and then been able to exercise their autonomy in doing that. Now, you might have to help younger or inexperienced kids develop that process or sort of enumerate their process. The most important thing when giving your child autonomy is that you always give them a set of defined boundaries and expectations. Never assume that they know it. Never assume they remember it. I always encourage my client families to write it down. Just start that operations manual for them. Now, the last of these needs that need to be fulfilled is the sense of competence, that feeling that you are skillful and effective in your environment. I want to stop here and I want to make this clear. It's not that they are skillful and effective, they perceive themselves as skillful and effective. That's very important. They need to see that they're doing well. This need is most often unmet when parents are setting unrealistic expectations for their child. And in this case, unrealistic doesn't necessarily mean that the parents have set the bar too high. It often means they have not helped their child develop an effective process to meet those expectations, or that the parents removed support too soon while the child was still learning to create a habit with that process. Now, when parents ask, well, how do I know that I need to support them? I'll ask the parents this question. Just think about your child's history with the task, let's say for the last 2 weeks. Have they ever been able to complete that task on their own? What I typically hear is, "Oh, wait a minute, Mary. No, 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 no. I know they know how to do it. I've seen them do it." When I'm silent and wait for the rest of the answer, I hear, "But no, I've never seen them be consistent for 2 weeks." If they've never done it, why are you expecting them to do it now? That's an unrealistic expectation. So again, clearly define the expectation. Work with them to develop or listen to the process they're going to use that meets that expectation and support the use of that process to ensure a successful completion of the task. Now, in self-determination, they distinguish the different types of motivation on a continuum because they're not created equal. A motivation is really a non intentional behavior that comes from not having your needs met. Here, people feel helpless, hopeless, maybe even apathetic toward the task. On the other hand, is that intrinsic motivation where our drive to perform is fully internalized and the behaviors are done purely for the feeling of satisfaction, joy, interest. And it's linked to feelings of choice and freedom. Now, between these two types of motivation are 4 types of extrinsic motivation. These motivations are separated based on the degree to which the reason to perform is internalized to the person. So let's take a look at what a person is thinking and feeling within each type of these motivations. Let's start with the extrinsic motivation of rewards and consequences that are typically used. With this motivation, there is no internalization. All of the control is external to the person doing the task because the rewards and punishment are all controlled by somebody else. This brings feelings of stress and pressure to perform. Now, introjected motivation occurs when a person is driven by an internal stress, not an internal desire, an internal stress and pressure to feel pride or to gain approval. They're not really interested or see value in the task, and you might see this as people-pleasing behavior. Identified motivation comes from within. It shows up when a person begins to understand why a task matters to them, or they see how it's connecting to their overall goals and values, even if that task is not fun or interesting. And it's accompanied by feelings of choice and freedom again. Integrated motivation is that drive to do a task because you genuinely believe in its value and it's aligning with your personal identity. Now, a lot of times what's happening is parents are trying to use external methods of motivation to build intrinsic motivation. Hey, I want them to enjoy having a clean room. So every time I walk by and see that their room's a mess, I'm going to take away electronics for a week. Mm, right? We can't create intrinsic motivation where it doesn't exist, but we can use some autonomy supported methods that get our child just as close as possible. When we use these methods, they say, I see you, I trust you, and I'm here to help you grow, not control you. Research tells us that children who are parented within this framework tend to have better academic and life outcomes because they feel trusted, have a voice in how they learn. This motivation from the inside helps them take ownership of their work. And they try because it matters to them, not to please adults. These students tend to have lower risk of psychopathology when they don't experience the stress and anxiety of feeling controlled. Autonomy supported homes model empathy and cooperation, and this naturally leads to kindness and helpfulness toward their peers. And children who feel accepted and understood are more likely to treat others in the same way. And when a child feels loved, no matter what, that consistent safety, that's what helps him go out into the world, take risk, and then come back for comfort. And instead of relying on rewards or fear of punishment, kids learn to guide their own choices by building their inner motivation and their inner self control. All right, big breath. I'm going to take a drink. You take a big breath. Let's see how we can take all of those concepts and put them into practice in our homes. This reset, replay, recognize process can help you modify your child's behavior in the moment at the point of need. This strategy focuses on redirecting a child to help them achieve as much successful as possible. You're going to use this when your child gets distracted, when they're being impulsive or disruptive, or they've had an emotional outburst. Examples might look like you see them using electronics during homework. They're jumping on your couch, or maybe they got emotional and talked back to you. Now, when this type of incident occurs, the first thing a parent has to do is to reset yourself. Okay? Just use some basic trigger management and find a level of calm so that you're not yelling and screaming at a kid. If there is no one bleeding and the house is not on fire, you have time to do this. Get away from that, I've got to nip this in the bud attitude. We don't need that. I want you to know that you're not going to be resetting yourself so you can just get in there and start giving orders and punishment. You're resetting yourself so that you can teach your child how to correct their own behavior. Now, when you're ready, go calmly reset your child. And this is really just an interruption of what's going on, but stay as calm as possible. And a good way to do that is just to focus on asking a form of these kind of questions. Remember to use as pleasant a tone, as calm a tone as you can. Let's use the example of that child who's jumping on the couch. Hey, what's going on in here? I'm jumping on the couch. This brings your child's attention to their behavior. Well, what are you supposed to be doing? Where's the best place for you to be jumping? Oh, probably on the trampoline or on the floor. This lets your child assess their current behavior. Okay, well, where are you going to jump now? I'm going to go jump on the trampoline outside. Now, this gives your child an opportunity to adjust their behavior. Now, if your child has lost emotional control, you need to wait until they can soothe themselves and find a sense of calm before you go on. Okay? Just let them calm and reset themselves. You have to give the child an opportunity to replay or retry this behavior. They need this opportunity to make things right and to complete this task successfully. In the couch example, the child went from jumping on the couch to jumping on the trampoline. In the case of back talk, it might be allowing the child to express themselves as constructively as they can with the level of tact that they possess and the vocabulary that they have. Remember, they're way younger than you. So learning does not happen at the reset. It occurs at the replay. We want to end by verbally recognizing that your child has successfully redirected their behavior and they've acted in an appropriate way. I like the way you stopped jumping on the couch and decided to jump on the trampoline instead. Or, I appreciate you taking the time to get your thoughts together and telling me how you feel without yelling at me. So let's look at how this meets those three needs. With regard to relatedness, as a parent, I accept that my child is distractible, impulsive, struggles with emotion. So I don't come into these situations screaming at them that they're being disobedient. I take the time to see it from their point of view. Hey, did you know you're off track? Do you remember where the track is? Do you know how to get back to the track? And deep in my heart, I know I don't have a bad kid. I want them to be as successful as possible on that replay. Let's talk about autonomy. I allowed the child to choose a better alternative. They could have just chosen to stop jumping and go do something else in the house, but they gave themselves workable options. I could jump on the floor or I could jump on the trampoline. I want you to realize I didn't give them any of that. I asked 3 questions and I allowed them to choose. I gave them the autonomy to choose the better alternative for them. And meeting the need for competence. I made sure they understood the steps that got them that successful result. Thank you for calming down, getting your thoughts together so you could tell me how you feel without yelling at me. All right, so that's an in the need, that point of need treatment. How about if we're talking about building a longer term skill, making a longer term behavioral change? What I did is I adapted a common process improvement framework for parents to use with their children to develop these long-term skills. I want you to note that relatedness, that relationship circle, includes meeting those needs of relatedness, autonomy, and competence. And it touches all parts of this improvement method, meaning we still have to behave that way no matter where we are in this process. Our first step is going to be to clearly define the process that we're working on. And I want you to avoid these broad categories like they're not motivated, they're failing academically. That may all be true. You want to work on the process of completing and turning in their homework. Be specific down to the process, right? Next, we're going to define your expectation for the process. Parents, at this point, I only want you to focus on the minimum that needs to happen for your child to be successful. Now, don't get caught up in this. Well, I want my child to do better than the bare minimum. And that's because they're not doing any of it well now. Anyway, focus on finding the right process for the basic requirements first. And then we're going to build and add more expectations later. Make sure you provide a time boundary as well. In my example, the minimum success criteria is that the child completes their homework every night and that there's no later missing assignments. I want you to notice we're not saying spend 10 minutes on your Spanish vocabulary, look over your math notes. It's all great stuff, but we just need to get their homework turned in. So we're just focusing on that. Now, the parents really liked that this child was playing soccer, but they were starting to think that maybe it was getting in the way of homework. So they added another expectation, is that outside activities should not interfere with this getting complete. When your child understands these expectations, we're going to move into the measure phase of the method. Here, we're going to help them develop the process that's going to be used to meet the expectations. Now, you may have to ask them questions like, which step are you going to do first? Does it really make sense to do this step here? But I need you to resist to be the only one creating this process. Now, here's what this family came up with. Child comes home, takes a brain break with electronics. Parents are going to use multiple prompts to get them started on homework. Mom's going to look up the assignments that are due tomorrow, give them to the child. They will pause homework or an extracurricular activity if they need to, and then they'll return to homework after the dinner and activity if the homework wasn't finished. Now we need to measure the effectiveness of the process. So we do need a way to measure the effectiveness of this process. So we need a couple of tangible metrics that tell us, is this working or is it not working? This family chose how many later or missing assignments does the child have and did they complete the homework? Seems pretty good. Now you're going to be tempted to want to measure a whole lot of other things, like how many prompts did it take to get them there? Again, they may be neat, but they don't directly relate to that process that we're working on, completing the homework and getting it in. Now, we're going to gather some baseline data for about a week. It's very important that you remember we're collecting this process, we're collaborating in this process with our child. So no data should ever be recorded unless the parent and the child are both present. We're going to keep going, and then we're going to keep this page where everyone can see it. Oh, Mary, we thought it would be easier if we just kept it on the computer. No. Well, Mary, I thought it would be easier to just keep on my phone and we'll look at it every day. No. We're going to put it on a piece of paper, old school, where everyone can see it at any time. This is an important step because this is building your child's awareness of their performance. They see it in real time and it removes everyone's opinion. Now, this is what the family's data look like. I'll give you a minute to look at that. Every day missing papers, not really completing homework. Now, you're going to hold a family meeting and you're going to look at the data and take note of any observations. And in my example, the parents kind of noticed it's pretty hard to get them to transition from their video games to Legos back to their homework. They noticed that the highest number of missing assignments came after that soccer practice. What they also noticed was, interestingly enough, no one was paying attention to making up the ones that never were completed, right? They just started each day as though it was a new day. And so the parents also used their training to say, let's look at this through an executive function lens. I think what's happening is they're having trouble transitioning, they're having trouble sustaining attention on homework, and the flexibility and the persistence to the goal. These parents also reached a new level of acknowledgement that taking away electronics in the past for having missing assignments had never helped this process get better. A big aha moment came when we asked the child's point of view, and they shared, well, I didn't think homework was all that important because I always got to stop to go to soccer. So in the improvement phase, you're going to take all that data and observations, and you're going to brainstorm possible changes to make with your child. Be sure to consider changes that are addressing your child's innate needs of relatedness, autonomy, and competence. I have had children in going through this process say, well, I think if I have a missing assignment, you should take away my electronics. If I have a missing assignment, you should do this. If I had, they're even the kids are accustomed to thinking of a punishment of what should happen. The parents and the child came up with, how about we don't do electronics before homework? What if we help you look up your own assignments with mom's help? What if we just don't do activities until homework is complete? What if the parents remove control and control these distractions that you're having? Maybe you could get a snack before starting homework. And now you don't want to overwhelm yourself or your child by trying to implement all of these changes at once. Just select one or two that you think is going to move them the most towards success. This family chose, let's don't do electronics before homework and get a snack before starting. That will be our brain break. And then they documented the new process. Okay. So that's the change that they made. Now, I recommended adding a step in the process that reminded the child of what was coming after homework, kind of what did getting homework mean for them? And they decided to add this step of, oh, when homework is done for me, then I proceed to my free time. And then they decided to use this process for the next 2 weeks. Now, that's a good period of time because it's long enough for everyone to get used to the change and to continue to track these metrics. This is the data that was collected after that first change was made to the process. At the end of this trial period, you're going to ask yourself, did this change work well enough to satisfy the minimum requirements? Well, in this example, you can see that having a snack for a brain break and not doing electronics, it helped a little bit, but they're still not meeting the expectation. This means we have to go back to our list of brainstorm solutions and pick another change to make. In this case, they decided we're just not going to go to soccer and during the week unless homework is complete. Now, the child was still allowed to go to the games on the weekend, but they just couldn't go to soccer during the week unless the homework was complete that night. Now, I want to point out that you guys are probably having this internal feeling right now. The same feeling that these parents had was that they hated taking soccer practice away from them because they thought that the exercise was good for them. But doing this actually clarified their expectation that activities not interfere with homework. And it helped the parents align their actions with their priorities and how to teach their child to do the same thing. So again, they used this new process, tracked the metrics to see if it worked. Here's the data after that second change. Now, things still aren't perfect. The child did miss soccer practice 1 week, but he made it the next week. And I think in this case, holding those expectations allowed that child's intrinsic motivation to play soccer kind of contribute to his motivation to complete the homework. We can see that they're enjoying more free time on the non-soccer days, meaning they got to play electronics, Legos when it wasn't a soccer day. They even had a day when the child started their homework without any prompt from the parent. Again, at this point, you're going to ask yourself, do we need to make more changes? Or is this what we want to work with going forward? Of course, you can go back and make any changes you want to and continue to grow. But this family just decided, let's continue and grow and consistent from here. So they moved into the consistency phase. Now, you might think that finding a good process is the end of the line. It's not. We have to continue practicing this process so that the child can build the habit. It also builds their competence. So again, post that process where everyone can see it and the metrics. Continue to support them. Hold everyone accountable to using the process, parents and child, and continue to do those metrics. What I love about this example is that the family decided to modify their metrics to make them look a little bit more positive for the child. Now they track how many days did the child get to play on electronics and if they got to soccer practice, because those directly related to getting things done. Let's look at how relatedness is met with this method. The parents and the child are working together and making changes so that the child becomes more and more successful. The child can see that they're interested in helping. And the parents are starting to truly acknowledge and understand that the challenges from the brain differences is not because they're being defiant or disobedient. The need for autonomy is met because the parents may have set the expectations, the boundaries, but the child gets to be part of the process, right? Of figuring out how I'm going to do that and meet those expectations. And competence was met by that real-time feedback from tracking their metrics. That gave this child this view of his performance in real time. And he learned that aligning his actions with expectations and boundaries, and he began starting homework without a prompt. That is growing, and that is what we reinforced with that child. I do want to finish my story about the spiky black ball. I went to therapy wanting my therapist to stop my panic attacks. And in that session, I realized there's nothing she can do to make them stop. I'm going to have to walk every step on that path to healing. I'm going to have to turn every stone to examine the trauma that had accumulated to that point and caused that switch to flip. In therapy speak, I was going to have to do the work. I would be the one to experience the gains and the setbacks. But I also realized something else. I wasn't going to be alone. She was all in on helping me or motivating me along that path. She didn't dismiss my question why. She acknowledged it. And she helped me examine all the root causes that contributed to my panic attacks. She took the time to understand how deeply it was affecting me. In the beginning, I think she thought I was just scientifically curious about how do things like this happen in the brain. But the more we talked, the more she realized how stuck I was, especially when I described it. A smooth ball just bounces off of you. But if you have ever tried to pull a grass burr off a shoelace, you know that takes effort and it's a delicate operation and sometimes painful. That's how she showed me her relatedness, and we built our relatedness together. Over the course of my therapy, she continued to check in with me about all areas of my life, not just those panic attacks. She continued to allow me choices and control in my care, autonomy. She often encouraged me to review my progress and the skills I was building. I had a little red book that I kept all of that in. Competence. I found what I needed to heal, move forward, feel safe, and be effective in my life again. That spiky black ball, still in her office. I want you to think about the collection of yuck feelings that came up for you today that I invited you to put aside. An hour with me is not enough to keep those feelings from finding you again. Please find a support person who can help you adopt these kinds of practices in your life. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you
You're
so much.
welcome.
So,
You're welcome.
for all of y'all who are watching, and I do appreciate everybody just sticking around and asking actually some really great questions in the chat. I got to watch this during the International Conference on ADHD, and it kind of blew my mind because A, it reaffirmed a lot of the stuff that I was doing, but it also kind of taught me that this process takes time. And I think that's one of the biggest takeaways that I hope that a lot of people understand. And we actually have a question around this, and I'll kind of get into it. When we're dealing with our kids, we're dealing with issues like neurodevelopmental, and there's an understanding that we needed to have that in certain areas of executive function, social skills, and emotional dysregulation and issues like that, our children are going to be behind the curve in a number of these different areas.
Right.
And you have to adjust your expectations to where your child is at developmentally. And that's hard because your child may be excellent at social skills, but struggle with executive function, or poor at social skills, but awesome with time, awareness and things like that. And
Right.
this is one of those things that makes this kind of hard. And so I wanted to say that because there's a
Yeah.
lot of questions in the chat they're talking about my child is this age,
Right.
what should my expectations be? And so I've got some private DM questions and I've got some regular questions that I'm
Okay.
going to go through. One of them is fairly long. I'll try to break it down. If you need me to, feel free to.
That will help me.
Okay, so from the chat, I think that this is great framework, but I don't know how to apply this to my son. His issue is that he becomes very angry and catastrophes any situation
Yeah.
where he has to do what he doesn't want to, or if it's different than what he expects. It's like all day. For example, if a
Yeah.
basketball coach tells the team to dribble with his non-dominant hand, he throws a total fit and becomes disrespectful and argumentative.
Right.
If he's playing with friends in a playground and they don't want to do what he wants, he throws a fit and cries, and someone says, "No one likes me. I have no friends." If we are running errands and a plan slightly changed, the same
Yeah.
thing. Difficult, argumentative, disrespectful. There
Yeah.
are a lot of routines that we have in place, and we do the same thing every day with getting ready or doing homework or cleaning room. It's the situations of functional life that sends him into a spiral. I set the expectations with every place we go. We role play how to handle different situations. How does this translate?
So, oh yeah. So that's a lot of different domains, a lot of different situations. So what I would say is in those areas, those domains where you're doing what I call is calling the play, is sort of helping them pre-transition. Hey, we're going to the grocery store. We'll probably be there for 20 minutes. I know you typically get bored in the grocery store, and maybe you want to take something to occupy your time and sort of help them as you're calling the play, sort of ask them, how do you want to solve the problem that's most likely to happen? That can sometimes help. I also think that you could do that with the basketball practice too. Is that, hey, sometimes coach asks us to do stuff that we know we're not good at. And the reason why he's asking us is that he just wants us to not be afraid of it. And that, if I have to dribble twice with my non-dominant hand for a second in a game, I'm not afraid to go over there and do that and then get back to my dominant hand. Right. So I think there's some different ways that you can explain that and then sit with your child and say, how do you think we should handle that situation? And does it say how old the child is?
Brandy, how old is your child? You can just drop it in chat. While we're waiting on her doing that, do you mind if I add to this?
I don't.
I'd also find out if your child may have autism. He is 7, and y'all do that. Okay, cool. All right. I would also find out if he has autism. ADHD often does have some social components. They
Yeah.
also have issues, with transitions and things like that.
Yeah.
But if I'm going to practice and I'm wanting to do a thing, and the coach wants me to do a different thing, that's a lot of signs of ADHD. And, I want to do this. I want to do this thing that my friends are doing. I'm showing off with my friends. I'm doing this thing. oh, you want me to do this thing that's hard and I don't like it. And this makes me feel uncomfortable. Well, now we're dealing with sensory issues. And children with autism deal with interoception and proprioception issues where using non-dominant parts of our body can actually make us significantly uncomfortable. And that's where a lot of mine and my
Mm.
children's biggest struggles come into play is that sensory issue is so out of bounds for our brain that emotional dysregulation takes over. And at that point, we have zero comprehension of any kind of consequences or what I'm saying or anything along those lines. And you also said that he has been tested, but now he's medicated. ADHD symptoms can mask or compensate for autism symptoms. And if you medicate and the ADHD symptoms go into the background or they get better, the autism symptoms can actually get worse and or become more apparent, not necessarily worse, become
More
more
apparent, yeah.
apparent. And that's another thing to think about is now that you know the medications are working for some of those things, I would
Mm.
definitely, yes, get them retested.
Right. And just to continue, you're doing these things right now, but still seeing this amount of reactivity and loss of emotional control. So I would probably discuss this with my care provider and either adjust or add. Look at how you can manage that symptom intensity. Because when we have a child who is that reactive in just sort of our everyday life, applying behavioral concepts and strategies can be really hard because they're so reactive and because their brain is just turned off and can't absorb that learning right then. So I would probably talk with my doctor about the level of reactivity that your child is having to these everyday situations.
Yeah. Also, depending on the age, occupational therapy and play therapy are really great tools for emotional learning and understanding how to deal with social situations and how to react appropriately without masking. Like
Mhm.
understanding, hey, I'm really frustrated, right? Identifying the emotion, and
Right.
I need to go over here and calm down for a minute. Now, any child under the age of 10 is
Yeah.
probably not going to be able to do that. You, as a parent, this is why coaching and parent training, like what Mary does, is so valuable. Is you have to recognize that, and then without shaming and guilting the child, pull them off the side. Hey, let's go ahead and breathe and
Yeah.
co-regulate with them and really develop that. So, all right. Anything else on that one, Mary?
No, I would probably, if you're already doing a significant behavioral management strategy that would be recommended and endorsed in this situation, and you're still seeing that reactivity, I might flip over to either diagnostic or symptom management questions.
Yep,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Just to put it plainly.
Right.
Yeah.
And also, emotional regulation medicine like guanfacine or clonidine may need to be a part of the system. Talk to your doctor about that and find out if that is appropriate for what your child is going through. All right, next question. My
Okay.
16-year-old has an executive function coach and is building some tools to help her remember and follow through. M-
Yes.
My question is about her getting emotionally dysregulated in her friendships, which it results in her unplugging from everything and not wanting to engage. How can we help her manage her feelings to keep her priorities? This happened during exam time, and she plummeted in some subjects from 90s to 60s, for example.
Well, we really need a little bit more information about that. What happened with the friends? I mean, you don't have to say that, but we really kind of have to know what happened. What exactly was she feeling that created this emotional regulation to cause her to check out? And, I know she has ADHD, but was it an ADHD response or was it rejection sensitivity? Can we get some clarification on that question?
Hey, Tina, do you want to hop on microphone and clarify that for us? You don't have to, you can just put it in a chat as well.
Sure, no worries. She does have OCD as well, so I don't know how much that comes into play, but she has definitely it's very deep feelings of rejection. And if she feels like she's spiraling in that rejection, it's like she's sort of closed off in her own head for a little while
Mhm.
and nothing seems to be able to shake that. And it's hard for us to ask now because she kind of gets tired of us asking the same questions if something's happening. And then we will see the results on her exams and tests. And where we live this year is a really important year for
Yeah.
acceptance into higher education. So we're a little bit worried about that. I don't know if that gives you enough information.
It does. So the first question I would ask is her OCD well managed?
Yes, we upped her medication a little while ago. She doesn't seem to have the
Okay.
problems she used to.
And has she been assessed for rejection sensitivity dysphoria?
I didn't know that was a thing.
Rejection sensitivity dysphoria is sort of tied to sort of the immediacy, the lightning speed with which we can perceive a correction, perceive a rejection, perceive something wasn't accepted by others about us, and we just immediately get amygdala hijack. We just immediately get this emotional response that says fight or flight. I've got to protect myself, and sometimes that's what we see. Some people can say, hey, I went to the grocery store, the cashier, I made a joke, didn't really laugh. Well, maybe they're having a hard day. If we have RSD, that's so difficult to do. And what we know about RSD is that you can't therapy your way out of that. That's generally medicated to help stop that, give us a little pause between what just did I just perceive versus what I think about it. And then we do some CBT. Once we can kind of get that pause, we can do some CBT on reframing about, okay, your friend didn't text you back in 5 minutes. Maybe your friend is busy. Have you ever not texted a friend back in 5 minutes? Right? And to help them get some context around that situation, start processing that differently. I will tell you one thing that when a person is ashamed of their grades, the last thing they want is for you to talk to them about their grades or talk to me about why their grades are so bad. I would probably just say, I would go more from the how can we understand this? Do you understand? What help do you think you need? What do you think is getting in the way? Instead of why? Because I'll tell you, every kid with ADHD who's ever asked a why question is going to reply the same way. I don't know. Because they don't. So I would work on helping her find someone who could help her ask some of those motivational interviewing questions, those open-ended questions about talk to me about what's going on, what is happening, how do you see this situation instead of why do you think this situation is happening? So you might try some therapy here.
Yeah. Uh,
Yeah, perfect. Thank you.
Go ahead, Tina. You had another question.
No, I was just going to say she does have a therapist. Maybe we'll speak to her therapist specifically about that.
Let's make sure the therapist knows rejection sensitivity. And because you might have to go to a psychiatrist or someone else who understands that. Or
yeah.
your pediatrician can give you the guanfacine. It's the same thing, that the same medication, but I would have someone who understands that disorder evaluate her.
Yeah.
And it might not be your therapist.
Yeah. The therapy point has to come after the regulation, and our brains can't do
Yeah.
that. And so medication has to be in place that allows that pause. Like I said earlier, guanfacine, Lamictal, clonidine, these are all things that people can take for that emotional dysregulation. Your tantrums, your meltdowns, your RSD, imposter syndrome, a lot of that's rooted in the emotional dysregulation center of our brains. And literally, what's happening is our amygdala dumps that adrenaline into our system. The fight or flight reflex kicks in, like Mary said. There's no control factor at that point. The medication gives us that pause and allows us to start putting in place the things that we learned through therapy on how to manage those spiraling thoughts.
Exactly. And a lot of times that's a big pause. We have to wait. Like it may have happened right then, but I don't mean there's a pause to talk about it in the next 10 minutes. We may have to wait next day, 2 days before we go back and talk about that.
Yeah, another thing that therapy will teach is also what to do after the fact if you have had that meltdown or if you have had that explosion or something like that. You'll learn, hey, I need to do reparative learning and where I'm apologizing and going back and explaining what happened and how you perceived what they said. And then having that person say, oh, I didn't mean it that way. This is what I was actually referring to. And that starts to build up a library of experience for the child to go, wait, hold on a second. This person may not have meant it how I'm taking that. And that's all through therapy. So, another question. This one got DM'd to me. I give my kids pretty specific guidelines and I try to make them a part of the process with the autonomy that you talked about, but they still straight up refuse to do what I ask. Not in a tantrum way. She just looks at me and says, no. I tell her there will be consequences and she shrugs. I don't know if this is ADHD, oppositional behavior, or if I've just completely lost control.
Right. Well, I think you've given us an example that your punishment in the past has not changed any of this. Right. So when you say you're giving them the clear expectations, are they written down? Do they clearly state the end of the process and what success looks like? And have you asked them, what do you think the best way to meet this expectation is? If they can't tell you like what their first 2 or 3 steps are, it means they don't really understand the expectations. That can cause some emotional distress. That can also cause some, I'm not doing it, right? The other thing is I usually ask in these situations, and I don't know how old the kid is what is happening right before you're asking them to do something for you? Are they stuck or are they engaged in a hyper focused type activity like electronics, Netflix, texting their friend? They're doing something really pleasurable, a highly preferred activity, and you're asking them to go do a non preferred activity. That is a really difficult transition for the ADHD brain to make, to go from this to that. And so I generally ask my parents to do a transition strategy. And instead of saying things like, hey, in 5 minutes, I need you to, or hey, I'm going to give you a couple minutes and then you need to do this. My ADHD brain does not understand that. What it's telling me, if you tell me, hey, we're leaving in 5 minutes, it tells me I don't need to do anything for 5 minutes. And then you're going to come back in, and then I'll know to start getting ready. So, what I generally ask parents to do for this transition is I'll ask them to go in and talk to the kids and say, look, I need you to find a stopping place. I need you to find a pause place. And then you stand back for about 2 minutes. Leave them alone, let them try to do that. They don't need to know it's 2 minutes. So you're not going to say, I need you to find a stopping place within the next 2 minutes. I just need you to find a stopping place or a pause place. That's all you say. You give yourself that many minutes. Come back and say, I need your attention. Don't talk about anything that we're doing. There's no instructions given until after that they've shut down on that first preferred activity and turned their head to you and say, yeah, what do you need? And then you can give your instructions, and then I would wait and watch for engagement. There's a whole process that we talk about in Chaos Free Family where we do that. Over time, what the ordinary ADHD kid learns is that when I have the autonomy to find my own stopping place, it's so much easier for me to stop. There's no yelling, there's no frustration on my part, and it's so much easier for me to go do the other activity mom wants me to do. They also learned that if I don't listen to mom and she comes back and I haven't stopped, it's the same old yucky feeling about transitioning that I've always had. And so their brain does adapt and it does learn to go ahead and find that stopping place. This works on kids as young as 4.
I'm gonna tell my own story here with my kids.
Yeah.
I do this. I do exactly what you're talking about. So if I know my child is watching YouTube, perfect example. I know my child is watching YouTube. Hey, how much time is left on your video? And if they give me a number that's within a realm of, say, like 5 to 10 minutes, and I know that I've got to get going, and my alarm has gone off for me to get ready to get going, like if it's
Mhm.
within a 5 to 10 minutes and it's a good number, cool. All right, hey, when you're done with that, I need to talk to you. And I may say, hey, we're going to start getting ready or something along those lines, but I kind of figure out like what is their natural stopping point. Now, if it's my daughter and she sits here and says, oh, I've got an hour and a half left on this video, cool. Hey, I need you to find a stopping point and go ahead and pause it. And we're going to go ahead and get ready here in, X number of minutes, and I just kind of give her a thing. How much time do you want? 5 or 7 minutes? And
PDA, absolutely. You want 5 or 7 minutes.
And of course, they will always choose the longest amount of time. So I plan for that
Okay.
always. And then I set an alarm with Alexa and I say, hey, Alexa, set a timer for 7 minutes. And then it's not the parent that comes back and says, hey, it's time to do the thing. It's Alexa. And they can get mad at Alexa all they want. I don't care. It's an automated computer.
There does Alexa.
Yep.
Right.
And
Yeah.
but at that time, if they haven't, I come back in and say, hey, all right, Alexa's gone off. I blame Alexa because it's not me, it's Alexa. And I simply, it's time to go ahead and start getting ready. Thank you so much. And I make sure to thank them as soon as they go, cool, boop. I say, thank you so much for getting ready at this time and going ahead and shutting everything down. I appreciate you. You
Yeah.
know,
You showed them the behavior that made them successful.
mm-hmm. So, all
Right?
right.
So there's a lot of nuances in that. It really is about stepping back and not controlling that transition and letting them have some autonomy in that transition and working with how their brain can move from this preferred activity to that preferred activity. Parents are when we have these highly successful people out in the corporate world, Shane, who walk into a room and say, I need this done right now, and everybody jumps and does that. That's what adults do at work. That's not what kids do, right? So we have to learn
Absolutely.
to be patient with them as their brain is learning to do that transition.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, we are at time, everyone. I really appreciate everyone who showed.
Thank you, everyone. I appreciate it. You can contact me there. You have all my contact information if you need to ask me a question.
All right,